Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. First off, thank you for visiting my channel. I appreciate it. And I'd love it if you'd hit the like button before you leave today. And if you enjoy the content that you see here, check out some of my other videos and maybe subscribe to my channel because I have 2 or 3 new videos coming out a week. I think it's useful information and it's a valuable resource for people who are learning how to do silversmithing. So today I thought I'd harken back to something one of the very first styles of rings that I kind of figured out on my own. And I occasionally make one now and again just because it still seems to be a pretty popular style. So I'm going to call this a scroll ring because it's got some little scroll shapes on it for the design. Today's project, I picked out what looks to be a little blue chalcedony, and it's kind of a nice periwinkle color, so I'm going to go with it even though it's probably been dyed. I'm going to use some 3/16 inch fine silver bezel strip, 14 gauge round sterling silver wire, 18 gauge round sterling silver wire, some 26 gauge sterling silver sheet for the back of the bezel. I'm going to use hard silver solder, which I use for pretty much everything. So I'm also going to use a little bit of scrap silver to make some balls, probably. So, all right, so let's get started. And first off, I'll make a bezel for this stone. As over the years, I've grown less and less inclined to make real swirly kinds of things, but this is one of the swirly kinds of things I still kind of like. So I've kind of trended towards more clean lines and simple shapes, geometric shapes. Should thank all the people who've been watching my videos. I just passed 700 subscribers, which I never thought I'd see. And I appreciate the people taking the time to watch my videos. It's very nice. And the nice comments that people leave, I appreciate those too. Feel free, if you ever have questions that I don't explain in the video, to ask them in the comment section. I always try to answer questions pretty quickly if I can, and if I know the answer. This guy's shape. Pretty good. So with this one, I'm going to be putting some decorations around the edge of the bezel here prior to trimming off the excess sheet after we solder the bezel down. So I need to make those decorations before I know how big of a piece of sheet I'm going to cut in order to have room to solder that stuff down. So I'm going to make the little decorations first, and for these ones, I'm going to cut myself a little piece of 18 gauge here. Usually for these, I cut them about 1 inch long-ish. I'll cut 4 of them all the same length, about. One of the tricks I always learned, if I was cutting equal size lengths of wire, and I needed 4 of them, rather than just cutting 4, cut 5 in case you screw one up. That way you've got the original one to measure with again if you need to get an extra one. And if it's me, there's a good chance I'll screw it up on the one at least. I'm going to take my round nose pliers and I'm going to make kind of a small loop on one side here. See how small I make it, about like that. And I'll try to do the same thing going in the opposite direction on the other side. I usually get them twisted a little bit, so I'm going to have to flatten them out when I do this. And I may cut them shorter too after I put them around the stone. I don't have a specific formula for the length of these, but I'm going to put 4 of them around here. So we'll start with that and see how it looks. So I'll make 4 of those guys. And I'm trying to make them as symmetrical as I can. Pretty close. You could, if you wanted to make sure you had the round nose pliers in the same spot on the wire, you could make a little mark with a Sharpie on your round nose pliers to make sure you're bending it in the same spot. I used to do that occasionally. Those are pretty similar in size, I think. I need to flatten them out better. Okay. That's pretty close. I was thinking I was going to put a little tiny ball between each of them though, so I might cut them a little bit shorter and see how that looks. I could always cut some new ones if I decide I don't like it this way, but so if I want to cut the same length off of each one, let's do it like midway up one of those circles like that. I can just tighten them up like that, and they're a little bit shorter. Okay, so let's put those around and see how they look. That gives me a little room to put a little tiny ball in between each of those, just for giggles. Let's make a couple of balls, maybe 4. Let me find my charcoal block. I got a little bit of 14 gauge wire scrap that I found laying on the table. So I'm not going to want too big a ball, so I'm going to make pretty small little cuts here. Pretty good. That one had a little charcoal on it, still from the charcoal block. So. Alright. I think I need to cut the rings just a tiny bit shorter to make them fit. So just a little bit, not much. Okay, so that's basically going to be the top of the ring. Now I just need to cut a piece of sheet. And like I said, I use 26 gauge, which is relatively thin sheet, but strong enough for what we're doing here. So I'm going to cut a little bit extra on either side. So I think I'm going to start with the bezel. and then we'll add the other components. Now, well, let's put a ball on there. We'll start there and just work our way around. This one is not perfectly flat again. So I'm going to cool him off. Drop him on the shirt. I'm gonna throw a little more flux on there now. Let's do these guys first to get a stable thing to butt up against. You spray on flux with little things like this. Sometimes the spray itself will spray things out of position. So I usually keep my pick handy so I can push them back into position if they need to. Because the flux gets into that kind of gooey stage and it allows you to nudge things around kind of nicely. So, alright, so let's position a few pieces of solder here. Put a good one on the ball. There's kind of leaning up against there. Maybe. And then honestly, probably don't need more than one or two on each of these little scroll work guys. Let's try that and see where we're at. And we'll just keep adding things. I guess I'll just add the rest of it. Just making sure everything is where it's supposed to be. I'm just going to add solder on each of these components that I'm adding. I just lean it up against there. I wouldn't put it inside of the little circles here because I'm probably going to use some of that oxidizing compound to make it black inside of the circles to make the silver stand out. And so I don't really want a lot of solder flow in those circles because that makes it harder to oxidize that area. So I'm keeping everything outside of the circles. Outside of the circles, I'm just going to trim the sheet off. And then if you need to, if you think you need to, you can always add some solder here and there. I want to make sure this guy's on here good. I wasn't super pleased with the way that flowed, so a couple of spot solders here. Make sure this guy's got enough. Nothing more embarrassing than when you sell a ring and your balls fall off. Don't want that to happen. So I'm just checking to see if I got a seam on all of those things. I usually try and pick the balls off. That was always fun teaching high schoolers that they needed to pick at their balls. Can you imagine that? Oh, see? And that's why, because this one was not quite soldered down. So let's go ahead. We'll put him back on there. I was sort of hoping that would happen. And we'll put him back in there, and we'll reflux him, and then we'll put another piece of solder on here. So when I say try to pry the balls off, I'm serious. I want you to really try to pry them off as hard as you can, because sometimes they stick in there, but they're not really soldered down. But it takes a little bit of effort to pry them loose because there's gooey flux or whatever is holding it in there. Well, this is pick soldering. If you haven't mastered pick soldering, it's a super useful skill to master, and I actually have a video about it. If you want to check it out, I'll put a link up there for you. If they're not attached, a lot of times if you clench it in the water or with the pickle, they'll immediately fall off. But not always. Okay, let's pick up those guys again. I think that's on there pretty good this time. Okay, so now I'm just going to cut as close as I can and get rid of all the excess sheet here. Okay, so there's some areas here that I can't really get to with the little snips, and this is an unconventional use of the wire cutters, but it does come in handy if you wanted to snip out little triangles like that. Save yourself some filing time. And then honestly, you don't need any power tools to clean this up. You can use a ball burr if you want to clean up the rest of it, but your bastard file will take care of most of these angles here if you go at it from the bottom like this. So I like to file it until you don't really see any sheet outside of the wires anymore, or the balls. And you saw I did that all pretty much with the bastard file. You don't even need to use your little file for this one unless you just need to do a little fine cleanup. You can do that if you want to. But after that, when we put the band on and polish it, it should come out just beautiful. So, all right, so let's make a band for this guy. And I'm going to use a couple of pieces of 14 gauge round wire. Decide on a size here. So I'm going to cut a strip of paper here. Let's make this guy how about a 7.5? Okay, so I'm going to measure around the 7.5, and I'm going to have a split on the top of this band, so I don't have to have it perfect for this, but I'm going to mark it right where it meets at about a 7.5, and then I'll probably trim a little bit off to make it so it has a gap at the top. So that's the length that we need-ish. So I'm just going to cut 2 of these guys about that long. Next I'm going to straighten these 2 out. I always suggest if you're trying to straighten wire out, don't use the pliers to bend the wire. Use the pliers to just hold the wire to get leverage points, and then use your fingers to bend the wire, and you get a lot better results. No extra charge for that tip. So that's one way to tell whether something's relatively straight is how well it rolls on the table, if you're using round wire anyway. Okay, let's find the center of this. I'm just going to make a slight bend right there. Just like that. It's pretty close to the same. So here's what I'm thinking. I'm going to go just a slightly bigger bend. And then I'm going to cut a little more 18 gauge. Cut a couple more. I'm going to cut a couple of pieces about the same size as I made those previous little scrolls with. Maybe slightly bigger. I was thinking we could kind of mirror the scroll work here in the band. I always think mirroring part of the design somewhere else in the piece sometimes makes for good composition. Okay, so I'm going to make a little bit bigger loop on one of these. It's in here. More like that. But still make a small loop on the other end. So what I'm thinking is putting one of those in there and then one on the other side too. Something kind of like that. This has got a little gap right there, and if I go to solder that, it's going to have trouble soldering. So I'm going to make sure that's touching. Looks good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flux it, and I'm going to pick solder here, 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 and here on both sides. And then we'll cool it off and we'll shape it into a band, and then we'll add this to it. So let's do that next. Let me make sure I have enough solder here. I was going to cut some little tiny ones for the center pieces, so I'm going to cut a few little smaller ones. Get that one. Make sure everything's soldered on there. It looks pretty good. And then we're going to round the solder on the mandrel. Smaller part of the mandrel here. So. As you need to, you slide it down a little bit. Push it in. Or if you need to, use a plastic hammer wherever mine went. Tap this a little bit. Flip it around so you don't get too much of a taper in one direction. We were shooting for a 7.5, and that'll work. I don't actually have to trim any off on this one, I don't think. Here's another hint on a ring. If you're ever trying to get the ring to be the right size, you want it to fall to the right size on the ring mandrel, the band, when you're doing it. So if I pushed it just to the 7.5 here and then pulled it back, it would spring back a little bit, so it wouldn't quite be 7.5. So I want it to fall right to the 7.5. Okay. So next, I'm going to mount this on the back of this thing like this. But before I do that, I'm going to file these tops nice and flat so it looks like it just kind of flows right into the back of the ring. So you can probably kind of see now what I've done is filed it so that it'll sit on a flat surface. That pretty well. So my hardest part is always getting it lined up the right way this way. So we go this way, or we go this way. And we go probably that way. I don't know. Indecision. I'm just making some little marks to try and help me to get it on there straight. This is one of my biggest problems when soldering things together like this. It's getting them lined up just right and straight. But then, once I have it where I think I want it, I'm going to flux it, and then you can either pick solder here or just lean some pieces of solder against those and then heat the entire thing, mostly on the base, because heat will kind of go up, and that's the part that'll be hardest to get up to temperature so it sticks to it. So let's do that. I got plenty of solder there. Okay. Like I said, I'm going to heat around the base mostly. Take a peek and see if we're pretty straight or not. I think we are, but I guess it'll be easier to tell when it's cooled off and I can handle it. But for now I'm going to pickle it, and then I'll clean it up a bit. We'll set the stone, and I'll probably oxidize the recessed areas, and then I'll finish polish it and show you. So I got it mostly cleaned up with a Dremel where I needed to. Go ahead and set this stone, and then we'll polish it and oxidize it. Look at this guy. Let's see how he sits in there. I think he could sit a little bit higher than that probably. So I'm going to put a third one in and we'll see how it sits. So 3 to me looks like it sits just a little too high. Let's peel one of these in half. If you don't have any of these T-pins, they're handy for a lot of things. I think of them as macrame pins because my mom used them for macrame when I was younger, back when macrame was a big thing. Okay, that looks about right. Okay, so now I'll go finish this ring and oxidize it, polish it and then oxidize it, and then I'll show you the final result. So there's my ring. That came out looking pretty nice. The oxidation kind of makes it stand out. I did that off camera this time. If you'd like to see how you oxidize something, I'll put a link to another video where I do this as well. So, but yeah, I'll take a better picture and put it at the end of the video. Okay, well that was the scroll ring video. I hope that you found it valuable and useful, and that it was full of good information for you. If you found it to be so, make sure to hit the like button before you leave. And if you think that you'd like to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe to my channel. I'd love to have you subscribe. So that being said, thanks for watching. Happy silversmithing. Take care.